Let's bring in our legal panel now. Jesse Weber is a NewsNation legal contributor and Law and Crime Network host, and Misty Marris is a defense and trial attorney and legal analyst. Great to have both of you here. So the defense spent a day painstakingly going through text messages trying to undermine the star witness, who by most accounts did a very solid job the last 2 days. Did they undermine her?
I think they did a really good job. They were really meticulous and methodical, and here's why. You're looking at text messages from the time, contemporaneous. This is what their communications were at that time. Was she consenting to this sexual activity, the freak-offs, during that time frame? Not looking back in retrospect like she testified now. So it's giving you that contemporaneous image of what was going on between the two. And the defense went through it chronologically, and they capitalized on some of what came out in her direct examination. Specifically, she said there were times where she didn't feel like she could say no, which means she didn't communicate the no, and also that she engaged in it because she wanted one-on-one time with Combs. So 2009, they point out some really damaging for the prosecution text message, all the way up to 2016, right before this infamous video. So the defense really got some headway here.
But Jesse, the prosecution also made the point with Cassie Ventura on the stand in the first 2 days that a lot of times she said yes because she not only wanted to please him, she was afraid of him.
Right, and I think the number one argument is, well, what would happen if you said no or you vocalized?
Well,
we saw what would happen, right? So
on
I think
the video tape.
Look, I think what the importance of today was, the jury has to sit back and say, out of 11-year relationship, was everything coerced? Was she in entire fear for her life? Did she always not vocalize it? Is this the way she felt for a large portion of it? And by the way, she could have said yes to freak-offs 99% of the time, but the 1% she said no, that's the problem. And by the way, here's the thing. Not only did they try to undermine her credibility and say that she was an active participant, which goes to force, fraud, coercion, sex trafficking, they also went to her, what's her motive to go after Sean Combs? Jealous relationship. She filed the lawsuit against him. This idea, I think they went a little too far, though, if I may. I mean, they talk about drug abuse. So they say she was a willing participant in drug abuse, which, by the way, is important because one of the underlying crimes they need to prove or may prove for racketeering is drug trafficking. She was already doing it. But the idea was, well, he was going through withdrawal himself, and that's the reason why he engaged in the behavior he did in 2016. Didn't they say in opening statements that tape's indefensible? I think they went a little too far to try to say there's a defense to that.
Sean Combs himself put a video out saying it's indefensible.
Exactly.
Hey, listen, I don't want to gloss over that. This is the first time they said today on the stand, and they didn't say on the stand, but she testified on the stand that Sean Combs was addicted to drugs. That there was a time she took him to the emergency room because he overdosed, and that they were both heavily addicted to opioids.
Right.
And mentioned that.
Yeah, and that undermines some of the prosecution's narrative that we heard in the opening statement, that she was forced to take drugs, that they were both addicts, that they called each other getting high partners in text messages. So this is all part of, and this is where the defense is really threading the needle, and it's the only argument they can really make. They're saying, yeah, he engaged in domestic violence. He is a bad guy. He is a drug user. He's terrible. But it's not sex trafficking. It's not commercial sex through force, fraud, and coercion. And I think it's going to be hard for the jury to make that distinction, but these are the types of things that they got on the record today on cross that's going to help them make that argument that this was a consenting adult, at least with respect to this sexual activity, as opposed to someone who was under coercion.
But there was one instance, Jesse, that you picked up on that did, I mean, they don't have to say that every single freak-off. I can't believe we have to say these words.
It's like just in our language now, right?
It was a crime,
right.
But there's one in particular that sounds bad to you.
I agree it's a complicated case, but there was an incident that came up yesterday. I don't want to gloss over it. When she said that she and Combs are on a plane together. So first you have the travel component of sex trafficking, that he allegedly shows her tapes of the freak-off. It's a way to intimidate her. What happens right after that? She says they land. He asks her to do a freak-off. She does a freak-off. So if I'm thinking about the elements of sex trafficking, travel, intimidation, threat, you have a freak-off, a coerced sexual event with an escort, commercial sex work, that to me is something the prosecution should hone in on going into closing arguments in 8 weeks. That is the most clear-cut case of sex trafficking, an example of sex trafficking that I think they really need to focus on.
She also testified that she was afraid that he would make these videos public, that in fact he at one point referred to the videos that he had of the freak-offs on his computer, his laptop, as skeletons in my iPad. which seems to go to,
Absolutely.
I can hurt you with this.
Yeah, because remember, we talk a lot about the horrific physical violence we heard about, the psychological violence, but blackmail is part of that as well and fits into that definition of force, fraud, and coercion. So that incident really does squarely fit in there, and that's what, you know, the defense is doing everything they can to undermine, at least with respect to the sex trafficking, but it's very murky. It's also, to your point, over 10 years. So it's not that it's consistent throughout that time.
It's not just her testimony either. There were text messages that came out. She said, delete the videos. There was text messages where she said, I want to talk to you about the freak off. And he voluntarily said, oh, you don't want to do it, right? Like, he already knew that she didn't want to do it anymore. That's compelling evidence. It's one thing for her to testify. And already, by the way, we talked about it before, the prosecution built up her credibility with the two witnesses who came before her, and I imagine the witness who's going to come after her.
Who we now know is going to be a woman who will testify to what?
Dawn Richard is who we believe is going to testify, former member of Danity Kane. She filed her own lawsuit against Sean Combs, says that she was herself sexually harassed, but also she says she was a witness to Cassie Ventura's physical and sexual abuse. To have her testify right after Cassandra Ventura, that's exactly the corroboration the prosecution needs.
How is the jury taking all of this? Because what it boils down to is, I mean, it is, even the defense tried to say at opening, you're not going to like Sean Combs by the time this trial's done. You know what? I got to be honest. They're right.
Yeah.
I can't, he's despicable, this conduct. Even if you say there's no crime there and he didn't commit these crimes, what he admits to doing, you know, is really awful.
It's horrible, and that's really why it's so complicated, at least from the perspective of how the jurors have to parse this out and what the defense is saying. They're saying, well, he might have committed some state-level assault crimes, but it's just not sex trafficking. But to your point, Elizabeth, what moved the jury? Well, the reporting was that when pictures were shown of Cassie Ventura with a fat lip, a slash across her forehead, testimony about being stomped in an SUV, that those photos, the jurors were having visible reactions, looking away, grabbing their chest. So that's making an impact. And here's where I think the prosecution is going to make the link on when they on redirect, when they link the freak-offs to the physical violence, and also say there's more to these text messages and there's more to the narrative than what the defense brought out on cross.
And by all accounts, they were checking their watches this afternoon.
That could
that maybe the defense is going over a little too much.
I think that's what more, it was very repetitive today. I think whatever point they were trying to make, and I think we articulated it, I think they made it halfway through the day. The jury might be like, we get what you're trying to do.
We get it. We get it. All right, Jesse Ventura.
Jesse, what?
Jesse Ventura.
Hey.
Cassie Ventura.
I get that confused all the time.
Yeah.
We look the same.
I know, you were
living this
wrestler
case.
types. Oh my God. Jesse Weber, Misty Marris. Oh my gosh.
All good.
Thank you so much, really.